They kept trying to convince me about family values right up until they, drowning in debt and despair, fell into some dark abyss. Every day turned into a spectacle, with the main act being them desperately clinging to the last scraps of their broken lives. And in the middle of it all was me, watching their fall with an icy calm. Pity? Malice? No, just emptiness. There's no happy ending here. Only a long, painful finale where everyone gets what they deserve. My name is Michael, and I'm 22. Supposedly, life should be smooth sailing, especially when you finally buy yourself a car. I worked hard, saved up, and finally bought myself an awesome used Mazda. It's a dream. Fast, bold, and just my style. This car is a perfect fit for me, just me and the open road. Life seems to be falling into place, but then my dad steps in. So, what do you think a normal dad would do? Help his son gain experience, enjoy his youth? Yeah, fat chance. So, here's the deal. My dad, who seemed like a pretty decent guy, suddenly decides he can make decisions about my stuff. He decides to sell my car, just like that, as if it's no big deal. And not only does he plan to sell it, but he's also going to use the money to help his new wife, Cheryl, open a beauty salon. Yeah, seriously, a beauty salon. A family business, as he called it. I wonder, which family is he talking about here? His new wife and her ambitions? Now, about Cheryl. This woman practically marched into our lives, front and center, with a million plans and ambitions, like she was about to change the whole world. And honestly, she was so wrapped up in herself and her ideas that from day one, I could tell she hated my guts. Her look always said one thing: get out of my way, kid. I think she saw me as a problem, a living reminder of my dad's old life. Like I was some useless baggage she wanted to ditch so she could shine as the queen of her little empire. Then one day, I come back from work, looking forward to an evening with my car. And it's just gone. The car is nowhere to be found. I looked around everywhere, but it just wasn't there. Then my dad approaches me, casually says, "This was for the family, Michael. For us." For us? For who exactly? In his mind, by helping his family, I was automatically on board. Can you believe that? Ridiculous, right? If this is a joke, it's definitely one without any punchline. What's funny is that my dad didn't even care that I needed time to process this, to even figure out what just happened. For him, it was no big deal. And Cheryl was just standing off to the side, grinning like this was the best day of her life. You should have seen her face. She looked like she'd won the jackpot, as if that salon was her personal ticket to stardom. Though, honestly, if you can call something like Nightmare Beauty stardom. So, the salon opened. Cheryl and my dad were over the moon, decorating the place, handing out business cards left and right, like it was some high-end boutique in the heart of the city, not a room in a building with a broken AC and a leaky ceiling. They practically glowed, going on and on about how their lives were going to change now. And somehow, my life got changed, without even asking me. It's been a month since Cheryl opened her dream beauty salon. Honestly, that dream turned out to be about as grand as the idea that money grows on trees. There were so few customers you could count them on one hand, and that's if you added a little extra wind to each finger. I mean it. Anyone who wandered in there either did it out of pure desperation or because they walked into the wrong door. The place was as empty as my dad's wallet after that investment. Of course, Cheryl couldn't entertain for a second the possibility that maybe she was the problem. Oh no, how could she ever think such a thing? Instead, she had a whole lineup of excuses, one for every taste. Every day she'd come up with a new reason why her salon wasn't taking off. It's the location. Who's going to drive all the way here? Or even better, the advertising's just not working. People must not know how to read posters. And my personal favorite, people are just jealous of our success and too intimidated to walk in. Honestly, I nearly choked with laughter when I heard that one. Jealous? Of what? An empty chair and the smell of cheap nail polish? And Dad? Oh, he looked like a man who'd seen his own future, and it was not a pretty sight. Every evening he'd come home looking all gloomy, with lines on his forehead so deep I thought he might turn into some tragic Greek statue. He wouldn't say a word, but you could tell he wanted to disappear somewhere in the fifth dimension. But the moment I hinted that maybe, just maybe, the Salon idea wasn't the best one he'd ever had, he'd blow up, acting like I'd insulted his very soul. He'd glare at me like I was the one personally blocking clients from walking into their establishment. And so the scene repeated every day. I'd come home, see Dad brooding, and Cheryl looking like she was about to march out onto a battlefield to hunt for customers. They thought they'd attract crowds with their exclusive offers, while I thought I'd need all the patience in the world not to yell that this whole thing was a terrible idea from the start. They've got piles of debt, I'm still without a car, and I have absolutely zero desire to help out. One evening, things finally blew up. How? The usual way, with one of Cheryl's wise comments. Picture this. I'd just stepped through the door, hoping to collapse on the couch. But no. Cheryl was already waiting for me, standing in the middle of the living room with a look like she was conducting some inspection. And then, she started her performance. "You know, Michael, it would be nice if you showed some respect for the family," she said with this smug little smile, as if it was somehow my fault that everything in their lives was falling apart. She declared that maybe I should pitch in a little to help them avoid certain issues. Pitch in? Avoid what exactly? Seriously? Now I was apparently supposed to help rescue their failing utopian business. "Hold on a second," I replied, stepping forward. "You're saying that all these debts and your empty salon are somehow my problem now? Care to remind me how this became any of my business?" Then she started. "All you do is live your life like you don't care about anyone else. You could help out, you know. After all, this is your family, isn't it?" Her words were like bricks raining down on me, but I couldn't hold it in any longer. I could almost feel the patience inside me cracking. "Listen, Cheryl," I fired back, feeling the anger build. "My family! I'm your family! Remind me when I ever signed up for this?" And then it was on. We got into it, full force. I'd say something, she'd interrupt. Her words weren't just accusations, they were pure venom, like she wanted to wipe me out. She called me selfish, ungrateful, arrogant. And I shot back, saying I couldn't care less how she planned to get out of her debts, even if she drowned in them. Things got so loud that my dad rushed in and tried to break us up. That's when I let him have it. All of it. I threw every dollar in his face, every evening he'd slipped out to support her ridiculous venture. I told him I never cared about their family business, and had zero intention of wasting my time and energy on their doomed project. He stood there, stunned, like I'd slapped him. And Cheryl just kept shouting that I was a traitor and had no right to speak to her that way. As time went on, this fairy tale of a family business quickly morphed into a full-blown drama. With each day, my dad and Cheryl sank deeper into their problems, and now even they were beginning to realize that this salon was a one-way ticket. They didn't even have enough money for rent, and their debt was snowballing, rolling down a hill and growing larger by the minute. Every night, they came home more crushed, as if they were carrying a sack of rocks on their shoulders. The situation was like a vicious cycle, with no way out. The phone calls had become their daily nightmare. Creditors, the landlord, and even some shady characters they clearly owed money to. These calls shattered the silence of the house, like mosquitoes buzzing in a dark room. You know how it feels when a phone rings so loud that every sound tightens every muscle in your body? That's exactly how it was. Each call was like a hot bubble popping in the air, leaving an unpleasant feeling in its wake. One evening, as I was coming home, I heard my dad practically begging on the phone. He was talking to the landlord, and honestly, it was so embarrassing I wanted to plug my ears. He was trying to get him to lower the rent. "Stephen, you know things aren't great right now. Give us just one more week, we'll get it together." But the landlord wasn't budging. Every no hit like my dad was crashing into a brick wall. And each time he realized the excuses weren't working, his voice got softer and more desperate. When he finally hung up, he just sat down on the couch, head down. It looked like he'd aged 10 years in a single day. And Cheryl? She was pacing the house like a caged animal, muttering about how things would be different if it weren't for those bitter, jealous people and all the bad luck. Classic. Blame everyone but yourself. And I watched all of this with a strange sort of coldness. I know how it sounds, but there was no pity. Yeah, they were both sinking, slipping into the depths like they were being pulled down into a dark abyss. And honestly, I was just standing on the shore, watching. When things finally got desperate, they started selling everything. Cheryl and Dad put everything they could up for sale. They started with small stuff, old electronics, a few useless gadgets, random trinkets Cheryl had probably planned to use to decorate her glamorous salon. But when that wasn't enough, they went further. They started selling the furniture. Picture this, a normal house turning into an almost empty shell with just a few miserable chairs left. What used to be a cozy home turned into a sad warehouse with bare walls and empty corners. Every day they'd list something new, and each time I watched the room grow emptier. It was almost funny seeing Cheryl trying to bargain with buyers, acting like these were the last diamonds on earth. "It's an antique," she'd say with the kind of attitude like she'd been born with these things. But really, it was all just regular stuff nobody actually wanted. I swear, she truly believed that by selling half the house, she'd save her business. It was so absurd I didn't even know what to say. But you know, the funniest part came when Cheryl decided to win back her old clients. Oh yeah, she started practically begging people to come back to her empty salon and tried to lure them in with discounts that reeked of desperation. Their entire business was like an empty box, just sitting lifelessly on the corner. They were handing out discounts like flyers outside a club nobody wanted to go to. "Come back, you'll get 50% off," Cheryl would say to any customer who even happened to walk by. But people clearly couldn't have cared less. I watched it all and understood. Their dream was totally shattered. All their ambitions and grand plans for success had crumbled to dust. Now all they had left were empty walls and a mountain of debt. 6. Then something happened that I couldn't have imagined even in my wildest dreams. The salon burned down, completely. It was one of those nights when the silence feels almost sinister, and suddenly the quiet was shattered by a bright light and the roar of fire, as if fate itself had decided to stage the finale of their drama. Stars in the sky, darkness all around, and in the center, a massive bonfire in which all of Cheryl and her father's ambitions vanished in mere minutes. The smell of burning seemed to fill the entire space around. That thick, acrid smoke seeped into every fabric, penetrating even the lungs, leaving the taste of something irreversible and bitter. I stood back, literally feeling how that smell clung to me, leaving behind a distinct imprint, the very moment when their dreams turned to ashes. The salon was ablaze, and the flames devoured it greedily, as if it had all been planned long ago. For a moment, I even thought the fire was mocking their unfulfilled dreams. They had spent months, money, nerves, sinking themselves into debt, only for everything to come down to this red-orange blaze that left not a single chance. I simply watched as what they had recently called their future turned to ash. Cheryl and her father stood on the sidewalk, as if hypnotized. I could see how their faces looked tired and hollow in the firelight, as if they'd aged 10 years in an instant. Father clutched his head, staring at the flames in complete shock, as though he couldn't grasp that his family business had become nothing but a pile of smoldering embers. Cheryl stood next to him, clutching the torn hem of her dress, with a face that could be called tragic, if it all hadn't looked so absurd. They were silent, not a single sound, and that silence was worse than any scream. Father would sometimes lower his head, then lift it again, as though hoping it was all a mirage. But no, every glance at the fire confirmed the harsh reality, and I stood apart, watching this spectacle in complete emptiness. Inside there was neither malice nor pity. I just watched, understanding that I was witnessing the moment when their world was completely crumbling. After that fire, their lives literally went downhill. They once had at least some money for rent, acquaintances who supported them in the family business, even a belief in the future. And all of it disappeared in an instant, like the smoke from the burned-down salon. Now they were left facing a bitter reality. No home, no money, no support. Even the few acquaintances who once seemed like friends disappeared as soon as they sensed trouble. The only home they had left was an old trailer, abandoned on the outskirts of the city, in an area that looked as if it had forgotten how people even got there. Homeless people had once claimed that trailer, but it was so dilapidated that even they abandoned it. A decrepit thing with peeling paint and broken windows, reeking of damp and mildew. Imagine the level of despair it takes to return to such a wreck and call it home. Cheryl, who once proudly called herself a businesswoman, now looked like a shadow of her former self. She sat on the trailer steps, draped in an oversized robe that looked more like a sack than clothing. Her once bright, ambitious eyes now stared blankly, as if she were trying to grasp how her dream had led her to a life in this filthy, foul-smelling trailer. She sat silently, gazing at the wasteland in front of her, as though searching for a spark of hope in the bleakness of it all. Father, who had always been a symbol of confidence and resolve to me, was unrecognizable too. Every evening I saw him in the trailer, head bowed and eyes empty. It seemed he had lost all will to live, just sitting and staring ahead, as if unable to believe that this was his reality. He looked like a man who had lost absolutely everything and didn't even know where to begin to get back on his feet. And so, the final scene of this tragicomedy. The last time I saw them, they stood by that trailer, small, faded, as if abandoned by someone at the edge of the world. Scattered on the ground were remnants of their previous life, all they could salvage. There were old boxes with pieces of broken furniture, a couple of empty picture frames that no longer held any meaning, and a few modest bags filled with things that had lost significance, both for them and for me. Cheryl, the once self-styled queen of business, now stood there just a woman, clinging to the notion that life was giving her a second chance. She hugged herself tightly, as if that might shield her from reality. Her eyes were empty, her gaze focused somewhere beyond me, as if she still hadn't fully grasped that this was now her home. Her ambitions, her dreams, all those vivid visions of the future had been left behind, in the same forgotten corner as that trailer, which looked like it might fall apart with the next gust of wind. And my father? His gaze will stay with me forever. This man, who had once inspired and guided me, who had been an example for me, now stood before me, broken and defeated. It was as though he himself couldn't believe it had all come to this. He looked over their belongings strewn on the ground, as if trying to find pieces of his life in them, but in reality, it was nothing more than junk. I stood there looking at them, and suddenly, everything clicked into place. It wasn't schadenfreude, it was something quieter, colder. I realized their fall was the result of their own choices. They had created their own path to this abyss. Step by step, they'd done everything to end up here, and now they had nothing left but memories of what might have been. And you know, I no longer felt any obligation to save them. Their drama was their choice, and I didn't need to be a witness or a hero. I turned away without looking back, leaving them there along with that trailer and all their shattered dreams. Each step took me further, and I knew that finally, my life was truly mine.